Hi guys, let's take a look at another counterpart to the Justice League, the Squadron Supreme. There was various incarnations. There was the Squadron Supreme, the Squadron Sinister, and even the Squadron Supreme. There were multiple incarnations of the Squadron Supreme. But to keep this simple, I will refer to this whole thing as just the Squadron Supreme. I started by giving our friend Hyperion the cloak of 80s cape, thinking that it would kind of look nice on this guy and kinds of mimic the cape he was actually using. But in the end, I didn't really like how it looked, so I went with the classic cape. Essentially, it looks a bit better on that character. I was able to pretty much get pretty close to the actual look of Hyperion. The only thing I'm really missing is a proper belt, but pretty much everything else is pretty much spot on to how the original character was, more or less. And then there was an alternate version created by Alex Ross, which was black and yellow as opposed to red and yellow. And I have to admit, I kind of liked it. I kept the Domino mask because I love those tiny masks. So although technically this version doesn't have that mask, I thought it kind of looked good. And again, if I had a proper belt that went a bit higher or something, it would be even better. And using my Google Foo, I saw another incarnation of Hyperion. That seems to be a more recent version that appeared in the comics. And it was masterfully drawn by Mark Bagley. I love that guy. His style is so dynamic. So there was this look with Hyperion, which I kind of liked. So I thought I'd include it in the whole bunch. And there was the Michael Straczynski version of Hyperion, which I had a hard time essentially reproducing the look. Essentially, the pattern of the white lines looks nothing like what the actual costume looked like. But it's the pattern, the red costume and the white line and the H on the chest is close enough that it sells the idea that this is supposed to be a Hyperion, even though it doesn't really look like it. And then let's move on to Nighthawk. I couldn't find a proper mask for Nighthawk, so I tried to mix it with the Huntress mask, but it doesn't really work, I guess. So I went with one of the slimline masks, which also would make it easier to create the character at character creation. So this is more or less the classic look that the character used most of its lifetime. Although there were a few variations, this is fairly close to how the character looked. So I'm sure a lot of people will recognize more or less the character with this kind of look. Here we have more or less the original look of the character. The mask is not quite right, and also the black pattern on the chest should create like a big bird emblem. But it's close enough to sell the idea that this is supposed to be Nighthawk, and this is supposed to be his first incarnation. I guess the color palette kind of sells the idea that this is Nighthawk. At some point, they came back to that look without the red and with minor tweaks, but essentially it was a similar looking costume. Again, the headpiece is not quite right, and the black should be making some sort of big bird emblem, but it's close enough that people who know Nighthawk can understand that yeah, this is supposed to be Nighthawk. And in the Straczynski version, they came with a different approach. They tried to make it more quote unquote realistic, and they gave him some sort of body armor that had these sort of scales on it. I had a hard time trying to find a look that could reproduce that. This is about as close as I was able to get. But essentially, a black costume with the sniper goggles is more than enough to sell the look. And next we have the wizard. You can recreate the look of the wizard pretty much at character creation, and as you can see, you can get very close to the actual look of the character. Sure, there's quite a few subtleties that are missing, like the shoulders should be a bit more spiky, and there's this weird yellow arrow in his forehead. But overall, it's close enough that there's no way someone will look at this and not understand that this is the wizard, unless they don't know the character, obviously. At some point, they gave him a yellow suit with these tiny black lines all over the suit. The pattern of the black lines looks nowhere like what the actual costume had, but the yellow jumpsuit and the little black lines are close enough to sell the idea that this is supposed to be the yellow version of the wizard. And I threw in the W emblem for good measure. And then later on, they kept a similar look, but instead of a yellow jumpsuit, it was a black jumpsuit with tiny yellow lines, and there was this stylized W emblem that was created through the suit. Again, we can't really get the pattern exact, but it's close enough that it sells the idea of the look well. And they came back also with the cowl. They got rid of the cowl at some point, and then they gave it back to him for reasons. At some point, one of the version of the wizard became a new character called the Speed Demon. This is a pretty close approximation of the look of the Speed Demon, although all the yellow lines should be making little lightnings, but it's a close enough approximation that we can understand that this is supposed to be the Speed Demon. And I made an alternate version. Essentially, in comics, you never quite know if dark blue is supposed to be dark blue or black or a mix of both. So essentially here I went with black instead of dark blue, and I used the reverse slimline chest instead. Although it's missing the yellow line, I kept the W emblem yellow in order to be able to have some yellow on the chest. And here we have Dr. Spectrum. Obviously, I could not keep the asymmetrical nature of the costume. Like essentially, on once the red would be on one side, and on the other side it would be yellow. But sadly, even with the four color schemes, there was no way to reproduce the asymmetrical nature of the character. But this sells the idea well enough that we can pretty much recognize that this is the Doctor Spectrum. There were a few variations, very tiny variations, like there was a version where he had boots, a version where he had no boots, or a version where he had like blue pants as opposed to green pants. But there were quite a few tiny variations that were made with this character over the years. And at some point they got rid of the mask and gave him some sort of cape. Again, I would have needed a fifth color to properly recreate this look because the cape and the gloves would have to be black in this instance. Sadly, even with four colors, we would need a fifth color to properly recreate this character. And then there was the Straczynski version of Dr. Spectrum. Essentially, they were trying to create more of a real world, quote unquote. I guess they tried to give him what it was supposed to be a somewhat military looking costume. I can't say that that was really crazy about that look, but I guess within the context of that series, it worked well enough. Although later on they gave him a different look, a more superhero-looking look, I wasn't reading the book at the time. Essentially, it's only using my Google food that I even know about this costume. I haven't really read that version of the Squadron Supreme. I read the first handful of issues with Hyperion and Nighthawk, and that was pretty much it. And then we have Captain Hawk, who also became the Blue Eagle at some point. It was a bit confusing, but anyway, essentially this is supposed to be the Hawkman version of the Squadron Supreme. I couldn't find a proper helmet. Essentially, he had not quite a slimline, but not quite a big helmet either. So essentially, I went with a slimline version. And I made also a version using the Angelic helmet, but ideally I would need something that's in between. That's not quite as big a helmet as this one, but somewhat a little more helmet looking than the slimline. So you can pick either this one or the other one. It sells the idea of the character fairly well. Again, I used a slimline headpiece to recreate that look, but ideally I would have needed some sort of helmet to properly recreate that look. Yeah, it's this sort of helmet with an open face, but that's as close to the actual look as I could come with this, sadly. So this pretty much covers the Squadron Supreme. Although this was only a handful of character out of a pretty huge rosters, but essentially I would try to go for those that were pretty much either the main characters, or I should say the most relevant characters, or those that had the most interesting look, or those that had looks that could actually be reproduced in this universe online. Because there's quite a few other characters in the Squadron Supreme, but in some cases there's no way I could actually recreate them in this universe online, despite all the styles that I gathered with my characters. So that's pretty much it for the Squadron Supreme. So if you guys would like to see any other characters featured in future videos, just mention those characters in the comment section down below, and I'll see what I can do about that. So that's pretty much it for now, guys. So thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.